She asked to see the cockpit and was mocked for it. Minutes later, with 150 passengers on board and the runway rushing beneath them, the captain collapsed at the controls. The only person left standing was a woman they'd just dismissed. What happens when instinct, skill, and a buried past collide at 30,000 feet? This story will have you gripping your seat and questioning how we treat the quiet heroes among us. Before we climb any higher, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might just take your breath away. Brooke Rhodes had learned to stop arguing with her instincts. They were the only thing that had kept her alive through 2 deployments, 4 emergency landings, and a mission that still gave her hell in the middle of the night. She stood near the gate at Hartsfield, a black carry-on at her side and a boarding pass clutched in her hand like it meant something. Her blonde hair, pulled into a low braid, was starting to fray after a long morning of delay. Nobody in the terminal looked twice at her. Not the suited men scrolling through emails, not the young mother soothing her toddler, and certainly not the flight crew who walked past her without a glance. That was fine. Being overlooked had become her default setting. Civilian life was quieter that way. Flight 381 to Chicago. It was just supposed to be a quick trip. Get in, handle the contract meeting, get out. She hadn't flown in almost 2 years. Not as a passenger, anyway. Not since the mission. Her stomach turned when the boarding announcement echoed through the speakers. A part of her wanted to walk away. But she didn't. She never did. Instead, she stepped forward, her boots clicking softly against the tile. Row 11, seat C aisle. Close to the cockpit. Close to the exit. It was second nature now. Always pick a seat where you can see. Move. Assess. She didn't do it consciously anymore. It was just survival, dressed in business casual. She boarded with Group 3. The first thing she noticed was the co-pilot standing at the entrance to the flight deck. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Dark hair. Thin shoulders. Nervous hands adjusting his headset like it wasn't sitting right. His name tag read R. Blake. He smiled at a family walking past, then turned as Brooke approached. "I think we should probably move up to my room." "Ma'am," he said with a professional nod. Brooke hesitated. "Hi," she replied, keeping her voice casual. "I was wondering, would it be all right to have a quick look inside the cockpit? I used to fly." Blake's smile faltered. "The cockpit isn't a tourist stop," he said, his voice clipped but still polite. "Please take your seat. We'll be departing shortly." It was the tone that did it. Not the words. The tone, that tired, sharp-edged cadence of someone who thought they were being bothered by someone who didn't understand how planes worked. "I wasn't looking for a tour," Brooke said evenly. "I just wanted to introduce myself to the flight crew. Former Air Force. There's something about the captain I noticed." "Ma'am," he interrupted again, this time more firmly. "We've got everything under control. Please return to your seat." The dismissal was swift, clean, and not unexpected. Brooke nodded once silently and moved on. She didn't need to make a scene. She'd done her part. But as she walked down the aisle, she kept an eye on the captain through the narrow slit in the open cockpit door. Older man, mid-50s, graying hair beneath the cap. Something about the way he moved was off. Sluggish, as if his limbs were heavier than they should have been. His face was pale, eyes sunken. He was leaning hard on the seat as he prepped the yoke. Brooke took her seat. She buckled her belt, and she watched the door until it closed. The woman in the window seat beside her tapped away on her phone. Middle age, floral scarf, polite smile. "You look tense," she said, offering a small laugh. "Not a fan of flying?" Brooke gave a neutral smile back. "Something like that." She checked the left engine out the window. The startup vibration was uneven. Not dangerous, not yet. But coupled with the way the captain looked, 2 flight attendants passed by, chatting softly. Brooke tilted her head, just enough to catch the words. "She wanted a cockpit tour?" the one named Megan said with a scoff. Who even asks that? Like it's 1997. Jessica, the brunette beside her, chuckled. Maybe she thought she was still in uniform. People get weird about flying. Brooke ignored it. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to survive the next 2 hours. The cabin filled with the sound of seatbelts clicking and overhead bins slamming shut. A baby began to cry somewhere in the back. The captain came on the intercom. His voice was strained, as though talking took more effort than it should. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 381, scheduled departure for Chicago O'Hare. We're looking at a smooth flight. Weather's clear. We'll be taking off shortly. He paused halfway through the message, long enough that even casual flyers noticed. The woman beside Brooke frowned. He sounds tired. Brooke didn't answer. Her eyes were already on the cockpit door again. She could have pushed harder, said more, insisted. But she also knew how it would look. Another passenger trying to play pilot. She had no badge, no credentials on file, just a chest full of memories and a purple heart that collected dust in a drawer she hadn't opened in months. A mechanical clunk echoed through the cabin. The aircraft pulled away from the gate. Taxiing began. Brooke inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the moment. The hum of the engines, the roll of the wheels, the familiar cadence of takeoff. But the wrong person was at the controls. She felt it in her gut. Same place she used to feel the shift in wind before a dive or the twitch in the stick before turbulence hit. Something was coming. She'd learned to listen when her body whispered. The plane turned toward the runway. Final checks completed. Cabin secure. Brooke reached down and tightened her seatbelt. Her eyes stayed locked on the door to the cockpit, counting seconds, watching for anything. Anything. That didn't fit. And just as the engines roared and the aircraft began its charge down the runway, she saw it. Movement. Or rather, lack of it. Through the small reinforced window on the cockpit door, she caught a glimpse of Captain Steve Danner slumping forward, his shoulder dropping unnaturally. The co-pilot's head snapped toward him. His hands flailed, reaching for the controls. The nose of the plane began to wobble just slightly as the airspeed increased. "Something's wrong," Brooke said aloud, rising halfway out of her seat. The woman next to her blinked. "Wait, what?" The flight attendants hadn't noticed yet. No announcement, no alert, but Brooke could feel it, the way the plane jerked slightly right, then overcorrected. The co-pilot wasn't in control. Not fully. She was already moving. The aisle was narrow, but she moved like it was instinct. Because it was. In one fluid motion, she unbuckled, stepped over legs, and strode forward, ignoring the startled voices behind her. "Ma'am," someone shouted. "Jessica," she thought. Brooke didn't look back. In the seconds before the cockpit door loomed before her, she reached into her blazer pocket. No badge, just a photo. One she kept for reasons she couldn't explain. Her old squadron, Falcon Unit C-130S. Dusty boots, faded smiles. The kind of photo that should have stayed buried with the rest. The door was locked, of course it was. But the flight attendant panel beside it, the emergency override, still functioned under certain conditions. And in that moment, Brooke Rhodes knew one thing for certain. She hadn't come here to watch anyone else die. Not again. Not today. First Officer Ryan Blake had trained for years to be where he was. Right seat of a commercial Boeing 737, en route to one of the busiest airports in the country. What the manuals didn't prepare him for was the dead weight slumped beside him, the lifeless body of Captain Steve Danner, leaning forward against the yoke, his headset dangling loosely from one ear, breath shallow if at all. "Captain?" Ryan's voice cracked under the pressure, barely louder than the roar of the engines. "Steve, can you hear me?" Nothing, no response. The aircraft surged forward, already halfway down the runway. The takeoff roll had begun. Momentum was no longer a question, it was physics in motion. Ryan's pulse spiked. He reached across the captain's body to stabilize the yoke as the aircraft nosed upward. The takeoff checklist. He hadn't completed it. He hadn't even armed the autothrottle. There were procedures for pilot incapacitation, sure, but not during V1 speed, when you either take off or crash trying not to. There was no stopping now. And then, just as he managed to keep the aircraft level enough to lift, a sharp knock sounded at the cockpit door. Not just a knock, more like a command. Brooke Rhodes didn't waste time. The knock wasn't meant for permission. It was a signal, one that said, "I know what's happening. Let me in." Inside the cabin, panic hadn't erupted yet. The passengers were locked in their own conversations, a few glancing around as the nose lifted more steeply than expected, others gripping armrests tighter. Jessica and Megan, the flight attendants, exchanged uneasy glances. Megan had caught sight of the woman in row 11, now halfway to the cockpit. "I told her to sit down," Jessica hissed, but Megan's gut told her not to move just yet. In the cockpit, Ryan's breathing came fast and shallow. Sweat trickled down the side of his face. He'd flown for 7 years. He'd logged over 3,000 hours, but never alone, never like this. The plane gained altitude. A chime from the instrument panel indicated the aircraft had cleared 1,000 feet. Ryan activated autopilot with trembling fingers and radioed air traffic control. "Chicago Center, this is Flight 381. We have a medical emergency in the cockpit. Captain is incapacitated. I'm the first officer, requesting immediate assistance." The reply came back after a beat. "Flight 381, confirm the nature of the medical event. Can you maintain control of the aircraft?" Ryan glanced again at the man beside him, face gray, mouth slightly open, a thin line of sweat on his forehead. "I can maintain control for now," Ryan said, his voice thin, "but I need help." Pause, then, "We'll alert airline ops and coordinate with medical personnel. Maintain current heading and altitude. Stand by." Another knock, more insistent this time. "Sir, open the door," Brooke's voice called, low and clear. "You need me in there." Ryan blinked hard. The override button flashed at the corner of his vision. He shouldn't. It was against every protocol. But nothing about today was following protocol. He reached over and hit the release. The door hissed open and Brooke stepped in, closing it behind her in one motion. She didn't ask questions. She took one look at the captain and moved to assess. "Still breathing," she said, pressing 2 fingers to the man's neck. "Pulse is weak." Ryan watched her with a mix of confusion and alarm. "Who are you?" "Brooke Rhodes, former Air Force C-130 pilot, logged over 2,000 hours in tactical and emergency ops." "That doesn't mean you belong in—" "You're alone," she said, locking eyes with him, "and you're not going to be for long." Ryan hesitated for a beat longer than he should have, then nodded. Brooke slipped into the captain's seat, pulling the dead weight of Steve Danner gently back into his harness. She secured the seatbelt over his torso and adjusted her position behind the controls. Everything inside her settled. It had been 2 years since her last flight, but the switches, the panels, the symphony of blinking lights, they were still part of her. "Let's stabilize," she said. "What's our current airspeed and climb rate?" 320 knots. We're climbing at 1,800 feet per minute. Level us out at 12,000 for now. We're not going transcontinental. I want breathing room." Ryan made the adjustment. Brooke scanned the displays quickly, checking fuel levels, engine temps, and hydraulic systems. Nothing catastrophic, just one unconscious pilot and one terrified first officer who looked like he might be next. "You're doing fine," she said quietly. Ryan's hands trembled. "I thought I could handle it. I mean, I trained for this, right? Simulated engine failures, emergency descents. But this, Hey, Brooke cut in, her tone sharper now. "You are handling it. You didn't panic. You kept the plane stable. You made the call. That's what matters." Ryan nodded, trying to collect himself. Behind them, Captain Danner stirred weakly, then slumped again. Brooke pressed her lips into a line. "Dehydration? Heart?" she asked. Had been rubbing his temples since the pre-flight brief. Said he didn't sleep much. "I thought it was just stress." Brooke leaned back. "Could be a number of things. Doesn't matter right now. What matters is keeping 150 people alive." Air traffic control came back over the comms. "Flight 3821, medical crew will be waiting at gate on arrival. We're coordinating with your airline to determine if any qualified personnel are on board. Please advise if further assistance is needed." Brooke keyed the mic. "Chicago Center, this is Acting PIC Rhodes speaking. I'll be assuming command of Flight 381 under emergency authority. I am a former military pilot cleared on heavy aircraft, with prior certification in multi-engine operation." There was silence for a beat. Then, "Copy that, Flight 381. Standing by." Ryan looked over at her, his voice barely audible. "They're going to question this, the airline, FAA, the passengers." "They can," Brooke replied, "after we land." In the cabin, word had started to spread. Murmurs moved through the rows. The engines had shifted pitch too quickly. Something was off. Megan walked slowly down the aisle, trying to keep faces calm. But she'd seen the expression on Brooke's face when she approached the cockpit, and that wasn't the look of a panicked passenger. It was the look of someone who'd seen this before. Someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. Back in the flight deck, Brooke adjusted the trim slightly, eyes scanning the overhead panel. No alarms. No master cautions. She exhaled slowly. It was different from the C-130S, sure. This wasn't a war zone, but the pressure, the responsibility, the silent question of, "Are you the one who brings everyone home?" That was the same. She glanced at Ryan. "We're going to bring this bird down smooth. No heroics, just a clean descent, straight in. You good with that?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." Brooke allowed herself a small smile. Not because they were safe yet, but because for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. In the seat, in control, doing what she was meant to do. Flying. Brooke kept one hand steady on the yoke and the other hovering near the autopilot toggle, her eyes locked on the instrument panel. The readouts were familiar, almost comforting. Altitude, 12,200 feet. Speed, 312 knots. Vertical speed, stable. The bird was holding for now. But she knew better than to let her guard down this early. And flight emergencies didn't follow timelines. They unraveled fast, in layers, and if you missed one crack, the whole wall came down. Captain Danner gave a low groan from his seat, his head rolling slightly to the right. He was still breathing, but shallowly. Brooke leaned over, checked his pupils with a quick, light flick from her phone, slow to react. His skin had gone from pale to damp, a thin sheen of sweat clinging to his temple. "We need to get him on oxygen," she said. Ryan reached for the emergency mask and gently fitted it over the unconscious captain's face. He was still pale himself, though color had begun to return to his knuckles. The adrenaline was wearing off, and in its place came the heavy silence of reality setting in. Brooke adjusted the heading slightly. Chicago was still over an hour away, but the FAA had already rerouted them for priority landing. The airspace ahead would be cleared, but that didn't mean the rest would go smoothly. "You said your name was Rhodes?" Ryan asked, still staring at the autopilot display. "Yeah. You really flew C-130S? 2,200 hours in theater. Mostly Afghanistan, some Iraq, 4 tactical recoveries. Last one ended bad." Ryan gave a nod, more to acknowledge her than to dig into the details. "And after?" "Discharged. Medical. I've been grounded ever since." There was something quiet in her voice. Not bitterness, not regret exactly, just the weight of unfinished things, of being cut off mid-flight. "Well, I'm glad you were on board," Ryan said, voice low. Brooke didn't answer. She didn't need to. The gratitude was clear in his tone, but what hung heavier was something else. Doubt. Not of her, but of himself. He was still questioning whether he would have kept that plane in the air had she not knocked on that door. "Listen," she said, finally breaking the silence. "This isn't about proving anything. It's about getting everyone down safe. That's it. That's the mission." Ryan gave a small nod again. Then, more softly, "It's just, I froze." When he slumped forward, "I knew what to do. I've rehearsed it, simmed it dozens of times. But when it actually happened—" "You didn't freeze," Brooke corrected. "You kept it together long enough for the plane to lift, you called ATC, you opened that door, you did everything right." His eyes met hers, and something shifted in his expression. Not confidence, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. The intercom crackled. "This is Megan," came the voice of the senior flight attendant, nervous but composed. "We've been receiving passenger questions about the flight path and conditions. Should we issue a cabin announcement?" Brooke grabbed the handset and keyed the button. "Passengers of Flight 381, this is First Officer Rhodes speaking. We're currently cruising at a safe altitude en route to Chicago O'Hare. Due to a minor medical situation involving a member of our crew, I've assumed temporary control of the aircraft. We are stable, safe, and on schedule for a priority landing. There is no danger at this time. We appreciate your calm and cooperation, and will continue to update you as we progress. Thank you." She hung up before she could second-guess the delivery. The words had been deliberate, confident, but not too specific. She didn't want to start a panic, but she also didn't believe in lies, not when lives were involved. "Nice touch," Ryan said. "You're good at this." "Flying or crisis control?" "Both." Brooke smirked faintly, then looked back at Danner. His chest was rising and falling in slow, weak intervals, but it was consistent. "For now, we need to be ready for a manual landing," she said. "If autopilot fails, or if the system gets jittery, we take it ourselves." And you're going to help." Ryan looked up, surprised. "Me?" "You're the co-pilot. This is still your plane. I'm here to assist and to land it if necessary, but you're flying right seat, and you've got more hours in this specific airframe than I do. We do it together." Ryan exhaled through his nose, a little more of the fear drained from his face. "All right," he said. "We'll do it together." Chicago Center hailed them again. "Flight 381. Expect direct routing to O'Hare. You're cleared for expedited descent at pilot discretion. Runway 27 left has been assigned. Emergency crews will meet you upon arrival. Please advise intentions." Brooke keyed the mic. "Chicago Center, Flight 381 copies. We'll begin descent in 10. Intend full-stop landing, flaps 30, auto brakes set to max. Co-pilot will handle comms during final." "Roger, Flight 381. We'll be standing by." Brooke adjusted the altitude dial. The aircraft began a gradual descent, dipping under 12,000 as the city skyline started to form as a faint haze on the far horizon. Her eyes flicked to the fuel gauge. Hydraulics, pressure system, everything still green, everything holding. And yet, her pulse didn't slow, because the next 30 minutes would be the real test. In the cabin, Megan paced the aisle slowly, fielding questions from anxious passengers. Parents with kids. A few older travelers clutching their armrests. A businessman 2 rows from the back kept checking his watch, as if that would make the plane land faster. But what struck Megan most were the quiet stares. People could feel it, even if they didn't know why. Something was different. The confidence of commercial flight, the machine of it, had slipped slightly. They could sense it in the rhythm of the flight, The dips, the soft correctional turns. A subtle shift in power. Something had happened in that cockpit, and someone new had taken the controls. Megan stopped outside the laboratory and leaned in toward Jessica. "Who is she?" she whispered. "The one who went in." Jessica shook her head. "All I know is she moved like someone who's done this before." Megan glanced toward the front. "And I hope to God she has." In the cockpit, the descent continued. Brooke adjusted flaps, configured landing data, and began briefing Ryan on their final approach plan. Runway 27 left, winds out of the southwest, clean approach vector. She could do this. She had done worse. In a tent outside Kandahar, she once landed a C-130 during a sandstorm with a blown right gear and 22 Marines in the hold. This was a polished commercial runway and a forgiving tailwind. Still, she hadn't landed a plane since the day her career ended. "You okay?" Ryan asked. Brooke blinked, brought herself back. "Yeah, just remembering." "We've got this," Ryan said, almost to reassure himself as much as her. She reached for the throttle. "We've got this." Ahead, the lights of O'Hare twinkled like a map laid out just for them. And for the first time in 2 years, Brooke Rhodes was on approach. Chicago loomed in the distance like a city of glass and smoke, its towers stabbing upward through a thin layer of late-afternoon haze. Brooke watched the skyline through the streaked front glass, one hand resting gently on the yoke, the other hovering over the throttle quadrant. The hum of the engines was steady now, but it didn't relax her. There were still too many things that could go wrong between altitude and asphalt. Behind her, Captain Danner gave another rasping exhale. He hadn't regained consciousness, and the oxygen mask covering his face fogged slightly with every breath. The man looked worn out, used up. Brooke could only hope he'd hang on long enough to get medical help once they touched down. Ryan was quiet, flipping through the final landing checklist beside her. He moved with more confidence now, steadier hands, voice firmer over the radio. She recognized the shift. He'd crossed that invisible line between panic and presence. It was what separated pilots from passengers. "Altimeter set to 2987, he said, adjusting the dial. "Flaps 10, Brooke replied. Her voice didn't waver. "Flaps 10, confirmed." They flew in tandem, a strange harmony of muscle memory and mutual trust, even though they'd just met barely 40 minutes ago. Brooke was reminded not for the first time how flying was its own language. You either spoke it fluently or you didn't speak at all. Air traffic control's voice crackled through the headset. "Flight 381, descend and maintain 3000, turn left heading 2490, cleared for the ILS approach, runway 27 left." Brooke keyed the mic. "Flight 381 copies. Descend to 3000, turning 2490, cleared ILS 27 left." She adjusted the heading bug and eased the plane into the turn. Ryan initiated the descent. Outside the window, the earth rolled upward to meet them, a patchwork of rooftops and suburbs stretching toward the heart of the city. Clusters of gray clouds hung above the skyline, low and heavy, like spectators holding their breath. The cockpit lights dimmed slightly as the sun shifted behind the haze. Brooke glanced down at the control panel, verifying glide slope intercept. All systems still green. "So far." But something didn't feel right. Not danger exactly. Just a ripple of something. A whisper of instability. She leaned forward, scanning the engine gauges again. Fuel flow was slightly elevated on the left engine, nothing drastic, but still. "Throttle response feels a little sluggish on the number 1, she said. Ryan noticed it too. "You think it's degrading?" "If it is, we've got one good engine. Let's not get fancy." They both knew what that meant. No go-arounds unless absolutely necessary. One clean shot at the landing, one opportunity to get it right. Brooke looked over at Ryan. "You good to handle radios through final?" "I've got it." All right. I've got the controls. My plane. Your plane, he echoed. It was a simple exchange, spoken thousands of times in thousands of cockpits around the world. But here, now, it meant more than that. It meant trust. Brooke eased back slightly on the yoke as the runway came into view, a thin strip of light against the growing dusk. The approach vectors lined up. The final leg had begun. Behind the locked cockpit door, the cabin had grown quieter. Megan and Jessica were buckled into their jump seats, whispering final instructions to the cabin over the intercom. Passengers braced themselves, some holding hands, others staring straight ahead. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. This landing wasn't like the others. In row 11, Brooke's empty seat sat vacant, her black carry-on tucked neatly beneath it. A young boy across the aisle stared at it, then toward the front of the plane, as if he somehow understood that whoever had been sitting there was now the reason they might make it home. Back in the cockpit, Brooke guided the jet along the glide slope with smooth, deliberate movements. The aircraft dipped below the cloud ceiling at 2,800 feet, revealing the glowing skeleton of the runway ahead. "Gear down," she said. "Gear down, 3 green," Ryan confirmed, checking the indicator lights. "Flap 20. Flaps 27. She could feel the weight of the aircraft shift beneath her, the change in drag and lift. Her senses were alive in a way they hadn't been in years. Every vibration through the yoke, every pitch in engine tone spoke to her. The plane was talking. She just had to keep listening. "Final checklist complete," Ryan said. "Visual contact with runway confirmed," Brooke replied. "Wind? 7 knots out of the southwest, slight crosswind from the right." Noted. They passed through 1,000 feet. Then 500. The runway lights swelled ahead of them, spreading wider, clearer. The wheels were seconds from kissing the earth. "Approach stable," Ryan said. "Speed at 140 knots." Brooke's fingers tightened slightly. "Reducing to idle, flaring." The nose lifted gently, the plane leveled out. For a breathless moment, time seemed to stretch. The earth holding its breath, the engines spooling back, the fuselage floating forward like a glider caught in a moment of perfect grace. Then, contact. The rear wheels met the runway with a soft thud, followed by the front gears slamming down seconds later. The aircraft bounced slightly, then settled. A tremor ran through the cabin, but Brooke held steady. "Reverse thrust engaged," she said, her voice flat with focus. "Spoilers up." The engines roared. The plane decelerated. 100 knots. 75. 50. They rolled cleanly down the runway, slowing with perfect control. Ryan exhaled loudly, head leaning back against the headrest. "We're down." Brooke allowed herself a single nod. "Welcome to Chicago." Applause erupted in the cabin behind them. Loud, spontaneous, grateful. Passengers clapped. Some cried. Others simply closed their eyes. Brooke didn't move. She watched the end of the runway approach, then gently turned the aircraft onto the taxiway. "Flight 381, welcome to O'Hare," came the voice of ground control. "Emergency crews standing by at gate C-17. Follow taxiway Alpha. Contact ground on 121.75. Ryan took the handoff. Brooke kept the plane moving. It was only now, in the afterglow of the landing, that she realized her hands were shaking. But it wasn't fear. It was release. The moment had passed. The emergency was over. They were safe. The ambulance was waiting when they reached the gate. 2 paramedics rushed aboard. Megan opened the cockpit door, and Brooke stood back as they lifted Captain Danner from his seat and onto a stretcher. He groaned faintly. "Alive?" "Barely." Brooke watched in silence as they wheeled him off the plane. A few passengers craned their necks to get a better look, whispering behind their hands. None of them noticed her, and for once, she didn't mind. Ryan unbuckled, rising to his feet, then turned to her. "They're going to want to talk to you," he said. Brooke gave him a tired smile. "Let them. You saved that flight." Brooke shook her head. "We did." He nodded once, then stepped aside to let her pass. As she exited the cockpit and moved into the aisle, the passengers rose, one by one, not clapping, not cheering, just standing, silent and watchful, as if sensing they were in the presence of someone they didn't fully understand, but were thankful for. Brooke kept walking, her boots steady on the worn carpet, until she stepped through the front door of the aircraft and into the terminal light. Outside, the sky had cleared. The storm had passed. And for the first time in a long time, Brooke Rhodes wasn't just surviving the flight. She was flying again. The conference room was cold. Not freezing, just engineered in that corporate way where everything was controlled down to the airflow. The walls were bare except for a clock that ticked too loudly, a whiteboard no one had touched, and the thin laminated nameplates lined across the long table. Brooke sat at the far end with her arms crossed, fingers still stained with adrenaline, listening as the voices on the other side tried to make sense of what had just happened. Across from her sat a man in a blazer with a small airline logo stitched over his heart. Carl Evans, Director of Flight Operations for River Atlantic Air. His tie was too tight. His hands kept tapping a pen against his legal pad, even though he hadn't written anything since they started. To his left, a woman in a gray suit introduced herself as Amanda Keel, FAA liaison, observing the debrief. To his right sat two legal advisors from the airline. Nobody introduced the lawyer types. They didn't need names. They just needed to listen and wait for someone to say the wrong thing. Brooke said nothing. Ryan Blake sat a few seats over, a bottle of water in front of him he hadn't touched. He kept glancing in Brooke's direction, as if willing her to say something, before the room's mood shifted from admiration to suspicion. "So, Ms. Rhodes," Carl finally said, folding his hands on the table, "just for our records. You're confirming you have no current commercial pilot license or active civilian flight certifications." Brooke looked up slowly. "Correct. Not even a private pilot certificate?" "No. I let everything lapse after discharge." "Right," Carl nodded, jotting that down like it was a verdict. "And yet you assumed control of Flight 381 during a live emergency." "I did," she said flatly. "And executed the landing yourself?" "Dealing with assistance from the first officer? Yes." He looked at her over the tops of his glasses. "You understand how that creates complications. For us. For the FAA, for insurance. You weren't authorized." Brooke leaned forward slightly. "You're absolutely right. I wasn't." Ryan opened his mouth to jump in, but Brooke raised one hand slightly. She wasn't done. "I wasn't authorized. I wasn't cleared. I wasn't even invited," she said. "But while you were sitting at your desk, I was 30 seconds from watching a jet full of civilians plow into the ground at 180 knots. I had two choices: sit in seat 11C and hope the kid up front didn't black out, or do what I was trained to do. You want to talk complications? Let's talk about what happens when 149 families sue this airline for wrongful death." The room fell silent. Carl's mouth opened, then closed. Amanda Keel scribbled something quietly onto a legal pad. Ryan finally spoke. "She saved that plane. Full stop." Carl looked toward him. "I'm not saying she didn't. I'm saying procedure matters." Brooks's voice softened just slightly. "Procedure matters, but people matter more." Amanda finally raised her head. "Mr. Rhodes, do you mind if I ask something unrelated to certification?" Brooke nodded. "Yes. That photo you showed at the door, the one of your squadron, you had it on you. Why?" Brooke blinked. She hadn't expected that. "I keep it in my jacket," she said. "I'm not even sure why anymore. Habit. Those people saved my life more than once. Maybe I keep it close in case I need to remember who I used to be." Amanda nodded slowly. She didn't write anything else. The airline's legal counsel whispered something to Carl, who leaned over to listen. When he looked back up, he seemed slightly more composed. This is all preliminary, of course. There will be a formal investigation, standard for any in-flight incident involving incapacitation or emergency substitution. Of course, Brooke replied. We'll also need your statement for the FAA records, Amanda added. Voluntary but helpful. And there's been interest from the press. Brooke suppressed a grimace. People want to know about the woman who landed the plane, Amanda clarified. Especially after the audio leaked. They heard your voice. You were calm, clear. That carries weight. Ryan smirked. They're calling her Falcon 1 on some of the aviation forums. Brooke sighed, dragging a hand down her face. God, was that your call sign? Amanda asked. It was, a long time ago. You earned it? I didn't die, Brooke said. That was enough back then. Carl closed the folder in front of him. Well, like it or not, you're at the center of this, and once Captain Danner wakes up, we'll likely have more clarity. But until then, we'll arrange for you to stay local for a few days, in case we need further statements. Brooke nodded. It wasn't a surprise. Will I be charged with anything? She asked. Carl hesitated. No, Amanda said before he could answer. You won't. The FAA has no interest in prosecuting a veteran who saved a commercial flight under emergency circumstances. The law has room for common sense. That was the closest thing to a thank you she'd heard all day. The meeting broke up slowly. Carl and the lawyers shuffled out first. Amanda lingered, giving Brooke a quiet nod before heading out. Ryan stayed behind, watching her as she gathered her things. Her jacket, her folder, the photo from her breast pocket. You really weren't going to say anything in there, were you? He asked. I wasn't looking for credit. You weren't looking for anything? Brooke shrugged. I just wanted to get the plane down. You know they're going to spin this, Ryan added. The airline, the press. You'll either be the hero or the liability. Maybe both. I know, she said. I've been both before. He stood there a moment, then extended a hand. Thanks for not letting me freeze. Brooke took it. Thanks for letting me in. Outside, the airport buzzed with normalcy. Flights taking off, luggage being dragged, families reuniting. No one knew or cared that less than 3 hours ago, that terminal had almost become the site of a tragedy. As she walked outside, the evening sun had begun to set behind the tower. The sky was streaked with orange and gold, casting long shadows across the concrete. Her phone buzzed. A text. Full. Icon number. You did good. Proud of you, Falcon. Harrison. She stared at it a long moment, then smiled softly. Harrison had been her former CO. He never texted, not since the last deployment. She tucked the phone away. Somewhere deep in the structure of her chest, something clicked back into place. Not a return. Not yet. But a shift. The first movement toward reclaiming something she thought was lost for good. Not authority, not career. Just belief in herself. And as she walked across the curb toward the hotel shuttle, the weight she carried seemed just a little lighter. The hotel room was quiet, tucked high on the 15th floor with a wide floor-length window that overlooked the distant skyline. Brooke stood at the glass in bare feet, holding a lukewarm cup of black coffee in both hands. The morning sun spilled over the tops of buildings like honey, but her eyes weren't on the view. They were on the tarmac below. Far out on the concrete, jets moved like giant silver birds, taxiing, turning, lifting from the runway. She watched one plane rise against the soft blue, its nose slicing upward until it vanished behind the light clouds. It was the same route she'd flown just the day before, a flight that had changed everything, though to the rest of the world it might as well have been another minor blip on the radar. There had been no parades, No medals waiting at the gate, just some applause, a round of interviews she'd half-dodged, and an endless stream of passengers filing off the plane with the silent understanding that something rare had just happened. That the quiet woman from row 11C had done what others only trained for, because she had no choice. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She let it ring once before picking it up. "Brooke Rhodes," she said. "Miss Rhodes, this is Trina Vance, Media Relations from the airline. Just wanted to follow up on the press inquiries you've been receiving. We've had several major outlets reach out. CNN, CBS, even one from the UK. They're all asking for statements. A few want exclusive interviews. If you're interested, we can set those up." Brooke sat on the edge of the bed, the phone balanced between her ear and shoulder. "I'm not interested in becoming a headline." "Of course. Totally understand. But it's rare to see the public so united around something uplifting. You saved people. They want to hear your voice." "I used it when it mattered," she said, more to herself than the caller. "Well, if you change your mind, the offers will still be here." Trina hesitated. "Also, our CEO has personally requested to meet with you. He's flying into Chicago this evening. Would you be available tomorrow?" Brooke paused, then said, "Tell him I'll think about it." She ended the call and placed the phone face down on the comforter. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She just didn't want to perform gratitude or grace for the sake of optics. What had happened wasn't about going viral. It wasn't even about heroism. It was about instinct, about training that never left you, and about doing the right thing because there wasn't time to do anything else. A soft knock came at the door. She didn't move right away. Her first thought was hotel staff, maybe breakfast, but something in her gut told her otherwise. When she opened the door, Ryan Blake stood there in a black fleece jeans and a sheepish smile. In his hands were 2 coffees, one from the lobby cafe, the other already half empty. "I brought backup," he said, raising the full cup toward her. Brooke stepped aside. "You always show up with peace offerings?" "Only when I'm about to say something awkward." She raised a brow as he entered. "First," he said, handing her the coffee, "I wanted to say thanks again. For everything. Not just the landing. For not letting me fall apart." Brooke nodded, taking a sip from the new cup. "Second," Ryan continued, "they offered me the permanent captain's seat on the 737 line. I guess surviving a near-death experience makes you promotable. You taking it?" He hesitated. "I think so, but it feels weird, like I didn't earn it." "You earned every second of it," she said. "You stayed calm. You trusted the right person at the right time. That's more than most do." Ryan looked down, then back up. They name in a training seminar after what happened. The Rhodes Protocol. That's what they're calling it. Situational judgment under duress. Not the kind of legacy you expected, huh? "You want to show me?" he asked. Ryan nodded. "Let's talk visceral fight, and heck, visceral." Brooke chuckled. "Sounds like something they'll stick in a manual and never teach properly." He laughed. "Probably. Still, it's something." She nodded. There was a moment of silence between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Ryan cleared his throat. "You know, the FAA wants you back. That's the other reason I came." Brooke froze. They saw the flight data, the transcripts, the recordings. Amanda Keel made a few calls. There's a fast-track program for military pilots with lapsed credentials. With the right push, you could be certified again by the end of the year. "I haven't flown in 2," she said softly. "You just did," he replied. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned back toward the window. The airport moved steadily below, like clockwork. Nothing dramatic, just life in motion. "Would you do it?" she asked. "I already did," he said. "Signed up last night. You reminded me why I wanted to fly in the first place." She smiled faintly. "I'll think about it," she said. Ryan stood, his eyes searching her face. "I hope you do. You belong up there, Brooke. You always have." After he left, she sat for a while, watching as another jet took off from runway 27 left. She followed it with her eyes until it disappeared behind the clouds. Then she reached for her phone. She scrolled through old messages, old photos, stopped on the squadron picture again, the one she'd carried in her pocket every deployment, every flight. She tapped on it, then hit send and shared it with Harrison, along with 2 words. "You were right." The reply came fast. "So, you're flying again?" She stared at the screen, then smiled and typed back. "Maybe, but this time on my terms." She stood, stretched, and crossed the room to the small closet where her travel bag rested. She unzipped the main pocket, reached inside, and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. Her old flight patch. It was worn at the edges, frayed from use and heat and dust and time. But the symbol was still visible, the falcon in flight, wings wide. She held it to the light, pressed it to her palm, then folded it carefully and slid it into the breast pocket of her jacket. Not because she needed to wear it, but because she was no longer hiding from it. By nightfall, Brooke was back at the airport, this time not as a passenger, not as a hero, not as a headline, just a pilot, a woman who once fell and chose to fly again. And as another plane roared into the sky above her, she lifted her gaze and smiled. The ground was solid, but the sky still belonged to her.